per annum for the duration of Newham Council's membership of the Local London Joint Committee. 2.5 to approve an appointments to the Local London Joint Committee, who will be the representative and substitute members for the London Borough of Newham as required by the Local London Inter-Authority Agreement until such time that future changes are brought to the Mayor and Cabinet for formal consideration and agreement. Member Mayor Roxana Fiaz, substitute member Councillor James Asser. 2.6 to note for the reasons stated in this report that the Mayor Roxana Fiaz, in consultation with the Deputy Mayor, Chief Executive Director of Inclusive Economy and Strategic Housing Delivery, will review and determine Newham's Council's continuing membership of Local London on an annual basis. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
That's all agreed, Joy. Thank you. We're now going to be moving on to agenda item 6, which is financing the 2023 to 2024 capital programme, and that's set out in pages 72. And then I'm going to be inviting Councillor Zulfikar Ali to introduce this report, and then once you've concluded, I'll invite Comrade Hall to add any additional commentary to this report, and then we'll open up to questions.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Zulfikar Ali, Cabinet Lead for Finance and Resources. Chair, investing in the future to meet the needs of our residents is part of the administration's priorities. Whilst we do improve services budget, there is an ongoing need to borrow capital funds to deliver our key capital and delivery priorities. This report recommends approval for capital borrowing to meet the needs to deliver our agreed capital program, which was agreed by the full council and was part of the budget which we approved on 27th of February 2023 for the financial year 23-24. And the report sets out the requirements from the need as well as our need to comply with the legal process. As you will know, Chair, that it is estimated that we may need to borrow up to £240 million during the first 6 months of the financial year, and the details of which are in the report. But just to highlight a few key themes, we are proposing was £150 million to finance the housing acquisition in order to provide better accommodation for vulnerable residents and reduce the pressure on the council's statutory temporary accommodation budget. You may be aware, colleagues, that it costs us £40,000 to house on a temporary basis a household family. Can you imagine the cost, one family and a number of people we have currently on our accommodation and homelessness? So this is a huge pressure on us, and that's what the capital program is hoping to deliver. We have over £7 million to fund the estate regeneration. There's £2.6 million to fund early help, family help, residential, semi-independent and care leaver scheme, which will help to provide effective support and service and reduce the social care costs in that sense. And the appendices provide further details. We normally spend around 30% of our capital in the first 6 months there, and 2/3 normally go towards to the end. So the borrowing 1/3 from grants. There are other options that we do fund. It's just not the borrowing. We have the grants, we have the sales money, Section 106 money, capital received, and the revenue contribution. So there are other sources. We're not simply borrowing everything that we need from the external organizations. In view of the economic conditions, Chair, I'm sure Cabinet would be interested in making sure that there's some assurance. Our borrowing plans are fast enough, and we are taking every opportunity to borrow at the best time in order to get the best deal. And I would like to assure the Cabinet that our preferred strategy to borrow is long duration from the Public Works Loan Board, and that is a government body which local authorities have access to borrow at a relatively cheap long-term financing terms. You'll also need to note, Chair, that we are not borrowing in one go. Unlike the previous administration, we're not borrowing in one go to put the money in the bank and hope that we get some interest and we might sort of benefit from it, but that is not the strategy that we have adopted. So we are very conscious of the economic market conditions, and we ensure the best possible terms of the loans are obtained through a phased approach, and Director of Finance, and his colleagues do their best to ensure that we do that. And also there's a need for us to comply with the requirements of the Prudential Code, which is a legal requirement. So may I say, Chair, that the cost of such borrowing, as I said earlier, proper promises, improves our approach to internal controls, good governance and transparency. And there are checks and balances in place to enable greater openness and transparency. With those introductory remarks, Chair, I would like to now invite Corporate Director of Finance and Resources and Section 151 Officer Conrad Hall and his deputy Andrew Wall, if they wish to add anything.
Okay, thank you very much, Conrad. And then once you've concluded, I'll invite Andrew Ward if he wants to say anything.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Ali. For those watching, my name is Conrad Hall. I'm the Council's Corporate Director of Resources and also the Statutory Chief Finance Officer of the authority. The report clearly sets out what on anybody's terms is a substantial borrowing requirement, some £240 million. I think it is enormously important to emphasise a few things about that. What this report is not doing is setting new policy for the council. A budget was set by the council at the end of February, and this is just the natural consequence of that. Delivering that capital programme, as Councillor Ali has outlined, will require us to undertake borrowing in order to achieve the goals of that programme. So this report does not change policy in any way. It merely provides the authority ultimately for me to undertake those actual physical loan transactions on behalf of the Councillor Ali has emphasised the significant majority of that requirement stems from meeting housing needs, so acquisitions and building programme and so on, where aside from the obvious social need being met, very clearly one also generates income from those assets and indeed savings on other budgets in order to offset the cost of borrowing. And of course, as you would expect, we're very careful to ensure that the borrowing at all times remains affordable. I think it's probably also important to emphasise that last week, Councillor Ali and myself met with the chairs of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to go through this report in some detail, given its scale, and that also the Audit Committee has a subsequent role in oversight of the Council's borrowing and Treasury management requirements. So you have lots of assurance from that how the transactions will be managed. In practice, what will happen afterwards, provided this report is agreed, is that over the next few months I will undertake, as Councillor Ali sets out, borrowing in several tranches rather than one single transaction, up to the amount set out in the report. My expectation is that will be through the Public Works Loan Board. We don't rule out other sources if they're demonstrably cheaper than that, but we would not undertake any complex financial derivatives or other transactions. Any borrowing will be on sort of straightforward terms, just a fixed interest rate and eventual repayment and so on. Final point, just to emphasise, of course, we will try and time the borrowing so that it takes place as near as possible to our actual need to spend on the capital programme. We don't want to hold money for longer than necessary because of paying the interest on that. Obviously, it's impossible to time that perfectly, sort of the day before one needs all that. That's the aim one gets towards. And in order to ensure that we time that right and make the best possible decisions about duration of loans and so on, we take advice from our retained Treasury advisors, who are very well known and respected in the local authority market, in order to make sure that the transactions are carried out as economically as can be. I'll pause at that point, Chair. My colleague Andrew Ward is online. If there is anything, as you indicated, Chair, that he may wish to add. Otherwise, we're very happy to take questions from members present. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Andrew, do you have any additional comments?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just make one additional comment, which is that Appendix 2 provides the detail of how the figure of 240 million has been derived, and that relates back to the capital programme. I just wanted to merely add that we'll, of course, be monitoring and reporting on the expenditure and performance of the development of the capital programme at the quarterly budget monitoring reports scheduled throughout the year. So something to look out for, which links into this borrowing.
Okay,
thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'm going to be opening up to questions. I've got Councillor Neil Wilson, and then I'll take loads of others. Councillor Sarah Ruiz, then Councillor Carly Lee Parkway, and then Councillor Shabam Mohammed. Okay, in that order. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And obviously, clearly, Councillor Neil Wilson, Cabinet Member for Health and Adult Social Care, clearly welcoming the report, particularly in terms of housing acquisitions and also estate regeneration, but in my area for some help towards alleviating with my colleague Sarah Ruiz in terms of social care costs, in terms of independent and care leaver schemes. My question is where I think Andrew finished regarding the impact of this 240 million prudential borrowing on the council's approved affordability prudential indicators as outlined on page 70 and 71. Just the last sentence of that says, this assumes no slippage in service delivery, so the outturn is likely to be lower. The outturn is indicated on the general fund with including the external borrowing costs and other long-term borrowing liabilities is at 18.28. Am I to read from that sentence that that ratio of 20.77 is at the higher end as a prudential a prudential indicator? In other words, the top end, it could possibly be, say, in the realm of 18 to 19%. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take that question first. Do you have any initial comments? I go over.
So I think it's
Brad or Andrew.
Andrew to Andrew.
Okay, I'll go over to Andrew. Could you answer that question, please?
Yes, certainly. So the prudential borrowing limits there, they were set on the full performance of the capital programme. Experience has shown that there is slippage in capital programmes, not unique to this local authority. Many local authorities, in the nature of these larger and sometimes unpredictable schemes, there is naturally slippage. But I would add that in Newham, the performance on that has improved over the last couple of years. So where there has been slippage, that there is now less slippage each year that we're seeing, and we've got a better system of monitoring and anticipating it. So the limits that are set are there to sort of for the ratio of spending against the budget for the upper end of what's in the programme. So we'd naturally expect it normally to come in within that.
Okay, I'm going to come back to Councillor Neil Wilson because I know he's got a follow-up.
Thank you very much for that. I think it was in the caveat of regarding, because this authority, like others, had delayed programmes because of the impact of the pandemic, particularly construction of capital schemes, but that slippage would therefore be exceptional rather than within the normal ratios. And so I just wanted reassurance that we are basing this on a projection where we are actually getting these programmes, including those that have slipped, and we're still going to go possibly lower, but potentially speaking, it would be at that ratio of 20.77.
Okay, I'm going to come to Councillor Zulfikar Ali first, and then I'm going to come to Councillor Conrad.
I think we did have some slippage.
Councillor Officer. Sorry.
We did have some slippage in the capital programme delivery during the COVID period, but last year's performance was far better than the previous year. And I think that is the testimony of how we're moving things forward.
Yeah.
I'll leave to Andrew to the ratios issues.
Just a general point, Chair, to add to that, yes, as is our usual practice, we've set out the report on, if you like, the kind of more prudent estimates. Of course, we want to deliver the capital programme as quickly as we can, but things can happen. Events in the real world can delay it. So what we've set out is if you like, the maximum position what one could reach if it were all delivered on time, which is of course our objective, so that you understand the full possible impact of the decision that's been proposed.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to come to Councillor Sarah as next.
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to know whether we can add to this list. So not just if a project drops out, which is probably unlikely, but are we able, is that the maximum we can borrow in any 1 year? And if it isn't, are we able to add to that list of capital projects throughout the year, or is there a cut-off time?
If I may, Chair, clearly the capital program list was approved at full council. And there is a new process for capital strategy, which every process has to go through. If I recall, we had 256 projects actually initially submitted as part of the evaluation process, but that led to 16 only projects which met all the requirements. But if there are, if there is any slippage, etc., there are other high project projects, then they will have to go through that process. But as far as I know, there's no limit to borrowing based on need. I'm sure Conrad can clarify that.
Yeah, go on, Conrad.
Yeah, just to add to what Councillor Ali said there, this report is if you like, delivering the agreed policy in the budget and the borrowing that is consequent on that. Of course, it is open to cabinet, I should say, within the overall frame of council to propose additions to the capital programme, either during the year where that's consistent with that overall framework, or part of the annual budget setting process to add to that capital programme. The test, of course, various more complex accounting tests are applied, but essentially what it boils down to is ensuring that any borrowing is affordable and sustainable. Clearly, where you are borrowing for housing, although as with any transaction risks, you are generating income from that, but also significantly reducing the cost of temporary accommodation, as well as addressing a social problem that needs to be tackled. And so in principle, that kind of borrowing is unlikely to be constrained. Clearly, where one is borrowing for important policy purposes, but where there is no income from it, then of course the cost of that needs to be offset against, or weighed in the balance, I should say, against other service priorities that council may wish to prioritise.
Thank you, Conrad.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and then moving on to Councillor Carleen Lee Parkway.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Carleen Lee Parkway, Cabinet Member for Housing Needs, Homelessness and Private Rented Sector. Thank you, Councillor Ali, for your remarks. I guess I had a couple of questions and so just thinking about what we've heard this morning, thinking about what we know, we all know that we are not receiving any additional funding via central government. However, the needs of our communities are high, and the needs within our borough are high. And so I know the commentary in regards to the money within temporary accommodation and the difference that will make. But I guess what I do just want to ask you is, with reference to the 240 million, how much will that cost the council to fund overall? And I do appreciate through your remarks earlier, you spoke about it's not necessarily we're taking it out if we don't, we're not just taking money for money's sake. We're only getting this money if we need it as and when we need it. So therefore there's no additional cost. But how much would that ultimately look like when we think about what it is that you talk about today? And then also just thinking about the other elements around that capital programme and what difference that will make to residents, because we know that we've got needs in temporary accommodation. We know that we've got needs within our communities. We know we've got needs within adults, social care and children's social care. And even we have needs within the community safety piece around infrastructure and so on and so forth. So overall, what would that look like for the residents? Maybe an answer for the residents that are watching.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parkway. Clearly, the government isn't giving us any further funds. we've seen a substantial reduction, I think over 60% or so since 2011. So that has a material impact of a significant nature on our revenue spend. But some authorities have stopped, going through the capital, they're simply focusing on revenue. But here we are being innovative, creative, because manifesto commitments, we have those manifesto commitments are based on the needs of local residents. And so for that reason, we are investing, by investing sensibly and carefully. And that's the reason. And clearly the tangible benefits, as you can see, the temporary accommodation is, it's a massive cost to us. The situation in health and social care is absolutely critical for us to fund, because the social services have not been funded by the government for many years.
Yeah.
Despite the promises the government has made, we have not seen any significant health and social care reforms, for example. They've been put on the back burner. This is creating additional burden on organizations like us. And the state of the roads, the transport infrastructure that we have. I'm pleased and that we have a substantial capital investment in improving our highway, the transport infrastructure, and you've got a report on the agenda later on today. So these are the issues that we are addressing to meet the needs of the residents, to reflect the feedback that we all get from the surgeries, from the communication we have with local residents. Therefore, the capital investment is there to invest in future so that we reduce the revenue burden in the long run.
Yeah.
That will indirect translate into better customer care, customer satisfaction, great deal of happiness, and also a borough that will be well recognized for putting its resources where it's best need. In terms of your question about 240 million and the cost of funding it, as I said earlier, we fund the capital, the revenue implication of the capital through sales, through Section 106 agreements, through acquisitions, grants that we get. And if we can't do that, and then the rest is funded from the capital borrowing. And I think, if I recall correctly, the borrowing that we make through the government-approved statutory organization is more or less a 4% per annum interest rate, which is much lower than the market. I think every 1 million borrow, Conrad will give you a better figure in terms of what it impact, by 64% interest we're looking for. I'll ask Conrad to clarify the actual, the revenue implications for example, 240 million.
Yeah, if it's okay, then just to confirm that, yes, our assumption of the long-term borrowing rate from the Public Works Loan Board is 4%. Typically, by borrowing for longer periods under that, one gets a relatively stable interest rates, although that has climbed over the last year. It's not quite nearly as much as the headline rate that one will see in the news. So, just on the sort of straightforward facts of that, 240 million at 4% equates to an interest cost of just a shade under £10 million a year. That is, of course, the gross interest cost, against which one must offset the income from housing, saving on temporary accommodation, and so on as well. I should also add, for completeness, that of course one also needs to make provision to repay the debt. There's a statutory framework which I can go into in detail if that's required, but essentially for long-term assets that equates to setting aside about 2% of the borrowing cost a year, in addition to the interest, to make provision to repay the capital, and that those costs, interest and repayment of capital, are split between the general fund and the housing revenue account. So what we've done here is bundle up the total amount that the council will be borrowing, around 35 million, I think 33 might be the precise figure of that, relates to the housing revenue account. That's affordable within the plans for that, and the balance of 207 is general fund.
Thank you. Okay, follow up. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a follow-up, and I guess I don't have a follow-up on what it is that you've actually said, but I do just want to maybe tease out actually what the implications if we don't do. And I guess my question, and I guess it's not actually just for the finance colleagues here, actually for all of us. We all spent a lot of time during the period of, I think, September, October, up till the budget was approved, going through diligently what it is that we required in our service areas in order to be able to deliver the best for the residents. I guess what I would just want to draw out, if it's all possible, Chair, is if we don't do that, if we don't invest the money where the money needs to be, for instance, through the capital programme, what would it look like? Am I assuming that the 5,000 people within temporary accommodation wouldn't have anywhere to live? Can I assume that those people that require adult social care services wouldn't be able to get the services that they require? Would I be right in saying that children within the social care forum wouldn't get the social care that they require if we didn't make these difficult choices? Because I think we sit here and we talk about this money, and it's a lot of money, but I don't think the resident actually understands what the implications if we didn't do it. So I'm expecting saying that actually we wouldn't be able to deliver those really needed services to residents that need them the most if we didn't make these difficult decisions in order to ensure that our residents get support.
If I may, just to clarify that question, because I think it's a really important one, just to be clear, difficult decisions have been made in so much as we went through a really diligent budget setting process for the financial year that we're in now. And we presented to both Cabinet and full council the proposed budget, and that reflects service area needs and requirements based on service area pressures as identified and analysed. And it also reflects the requirements, that budget also reflects the requirements of delivering the Building a Fairer New Manifesto as iterated in the current corporate plan. And that budget was the financial plan of that. And this is the next stage of us, in line with our governance process, presenting to Cabinet rightly, given the agreed borrowing of £426 million in order to do all of the things that we agreed at full council as well, in order to offset, the Armageddon scenario that you've described if we didn't proceed with agreeing that budget at full council and at Cabinet previously. This is then the next stage whereby of that £426 million of borrowing that we agreed at full council, we're asking for the 200 million to be activated in terms of borrowing process. So you're right that had we have not approved the budget back in February at full council and then previously at Cabinet, then we'd be in a very different scenario and having very different set of conversations this morning. But I don't know if you want to add.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, this is a very, very important question from a resident's perspective, because, this is public money and we are the custodian of it and we need to spend it in the wisest possible manner. And the process that we've gone through is very, very extensive, huge amount of due diligence. As I said earlier, we had 256 projects and we went through each of those and made sure that the ones that get approved, the 16 of those, meet the manifesto commitment and the part of the delivery plan. Private manifesto commitment, as I said earlier, based on the local needs and our own due diligence outside. And they're very important. If they're not delivered, this organization will stand still. We can't afford to be stand still. The revenue pressures are already there. We do not have adequate money from central government to fund the much needed statutory services, let alone the amount of statutory services. Therefore, we need to make ways to look at invest to stay, economize what we do, and do projects that actually deliver better quality service in the long run. The capital projects have long-term impact. And if people see the impact, delivery of services, improvements, accessibility, it's going to, if we didn't actually invest in, look at the manifesto, we have the sustainable transport, we have climate change agenda, we've got environmental and public health strategies, education, the developments, every one of you have contributed. I do recall the extensive discussion we had at Cabinet when we're actually prioritizing which one of those 16 projects we will approve. So it is a collective effort, and I think I really thank the whole Cabinet and indeed the officers for the process that we've gone through to make sure the projects that we invest in are there to deliver the best quality services for the local people that they need. And they are visible, they can be seen. You can see, for example, housing developments, have a manifesto commitment about new homes. Wherever you go in the borough, you see massive buildings coming up. And ultimately, they are going to have some positive impact at least on our local residents, and that's something what people want to see. Thank you, James. Sorry.
I think
Tagging on.
just to add, in relation to your area of responsibility specifically, if you look at 3.3, so as part of the overall envelope of £240 million,
Yeah.
149 will be for acquisitions to enable us to purchase 380 units. And that will have a benefit once that's delivered of offsetting by some £13 million potential pressure on your budget. So it will save us £13 million. And I assume, well, just one other point to note in the context of temporary accommodation, we all understand that the temporary accommodation context across London is really extreme, and we're managing a crisis not of our making.
Yeah.
And it's a crisis that reflects the skewed housing sector in the capital and in this country, but also the impact of soaring rents, people not being able to afford the rent levels, which is why we're campaigning for a rent freeze in the capital. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. And then I've got Councillor Shabar Mohammed, question.
I've not a question. I was just going to say a thank you for all the hard work that you guys have been doing behind the scenes with the acquisitions, and I think it's going to make a real difference. And I think good councils are councils that actually step up at the time of a resident's needs. So whether it's been COVID, whether it's been the cost of living crisis, and currently we are in a supply, we have got a supply issue with temporary accommodation. So it's that work that we've been doing behind the scenes to make sure that we're delivering for our residents, and also about bringing costs down, driving up standards, especially in temporary accommodation. And I think one of the most important things is trying to keep residents in borough, because it has an impact on all our services, whether you're in children's services, adult social health. It has a big impact trying to keep residents in borough and making sure that we're meeting the needs of the residents. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions. Just noting the report referencing the £426 million of full year borrowing agreed as per the budget that was presented at full council and then previously at cabinet. Just for the interests of transparency and the fact that we're in a public meeting, does that contribute to the overall borrowing position of the council presently? Then I wanted to just probe 1.3 on big page number 59. There's a sentence here that's a bit obscure in my reading. In other words, I don't understand it, but could you perhaps elaborate? Where the costs are not specifically met through income from the specific projects that are being financed, they would either be rolled up as part of long-term regeneration schemes and met over time, or else the financing costs have been allowed for as part of this year's budget. And then my third question is, of the £426 million of borrowing that we've agreed at full council and then previously at a formal meeting of the cabinet, this paper talks about the £240 million of that 426 million. When do you anticipate the remaining £186 million coming forward in a formal paper for myself and cabinet to be approving? Because I've also noted the prudent approach to the borrowing requirements, and you're doing it across the near term, which is the initial 6 months of this financial year. And then I'm assuming short term is the subsequent 6 months. Anyway, so those are my three questions.
There. So is it okay if I kick off on answering those then? So the council's current total external borrowing is of the order of £880 million. And you're right, the budget that was set anticipates an addition of 426 to that. So a substantial addition for all the reasons that have just been discussed at this meeting. I think it is the right approach for two or three good reasons. not to seek approval for all of that in one go. And we're trying to strike a balance here between sort of, transparency, and efficiency. As has been noted, capital programmes can be difficult to deliver. Delays may occur for a variety of reasons that are well understood. For example, around conveyancing of transactions or planning or a million other things, all of which people will understand. And so, although delivery has got significantly better, it is the case for us, as with other authorities, that they may find that their capital plans are delayed a bit. I don't want to seek authority to borrow all of the required money for the year in one go. We're not aiming to have delays on the capital programme, but we recognise that some of that may happen, and hence, if it does happen, we only sought authority for 2/3 of that borrowing in one go. If, as we hope, we do reach the position of being able to deliver all of this year's capital programme, then we would return to Cabinet in, say, the autumn, September, October, November, in order to seek authority for the rest of the borrowing. And aside from just sort of sensibly passing it up that way, I think that is also more transparent. Although it is true that all of these report is in essence just putting into practice budget you have agreed, the sums are on anyone's definition very substantial, and it's therefore important that they ought to be seen clearly at Cabinet. So I'm very comfortable with the idea of a second report coming back in the later part of the year to seek authority for the rest of the borrowing, once we know how delivery is panning out this year. So my expectation would be September, October, probably November. Last, finally, Mayor, about paragraph 1.3. Agree on looking at that again, could have been put into plainer English. So apologies for that. We're always trying to strike a balance in sort of clarity and also technical issues in these reports. I think the best way I can explain that is to give a very practical example. So if one thinks about, let's say, a major regeneration scheme such as Carpenter's Estate, the way that the financing for these works, and this is completely standard for all local authorities, is that you parcel up all of the costs of that scheme against that scheme. So, the interest on the borrowing that's attached to it, you don't charge that directly to your main revenue account. You load that into the costs of the scheme on the basis, in the case of Carpenters, because we have the reasonable expectation that the long-term rental incomes will then enable us to meet those interest costs and over time repay the debt as well. Other councils, other developers do that by selling properties early in order to repay the debt. Financially either works, but Newham's got its agreed approach for that. So what that means is, let's make a really practical example. I spoke earlier about the interest rate of 5%. So let's, if one thinks of £10 million borrowing for that scheme, instead of charging the 400,000 interest costs of that directly to the general fund in this year, what we will do is charge it into that scheme, hold it on the balance sheet, and then over the years as the rental incomes come in, repay that debt and the interest that's been incurred. So that's what that means. Apologies that it's probably not as clearly put in the report as it could have been. I think a practical example like that would have helped, and we'll make sure that we sort of include that greater clarity on future reports. But just to be assured, being proposed there is completely standard for local authority developments.
Okay. And then I've just got one final question in light of one of the responses you gave. So in addition to the 426 million being requested to be approved today, presently the borrowing position of the council's 880 million, equating to £1,306 billion. And at what point, just given the inflationary risk and pressures that we've been going through over the past 18 months and prognosis in terms of the inflationary climate over the coming 12 months. At what point, not necessarily at what point, just in terms of the prudential borrowing framework, could you just talk through the steps that you and Andrew will be taking in order to appraise the Cabinet Member for Finance and Resources and myself, and then furthermore, Cabinet members at the appropriate junctures as to ceiling that we're reaching or issues of risk?
Okay, so let me start off on that if that's all right, and then I'll bring in Andrew. So the formal framework is referred to as the Prudential Code, which was introduced in early 2000s. Prior to that, the borrowing framework for local authorities was essentially you had to have permission from government to borrow anything. They would issue what were called rules to that purpose. Fundamentally, what the Prudential Code does, and there are some quite complicated calculations that sit down over it, what it does is calculate the total amount that the council is prepared to borrow at any point in time. You're not then fixed to that. You can change that each year, but it provides that sort of control as to how much borrowing can be undertaken. And the basic test for that is that it must be sustainable and affordable. And again, there are technical definitions for this that we can go into if required, but I mean, they really have their plain English meaning. You need to be confident that you can repay the borrowing over time, and that you will be able to afford the cost in your budgets. So each year, formally, council approves those limits. We make sure during the year that we carefully watch, that we are not in breach of any of those limits, of course, and report that. The formal reporting line is into the audit committee, which has responsibility for that oversight. We would, of course, make sure that yourself, Mayor, Councillor Ali, and Cabinet were also kept appraised of that. In terms of the totals, as at 31st of March, our total borrowing was 895 million. Apologies, I may have said 885 earlier in the meeting. Apologies for that, it's 890. So this is, in total, we expect to add over the course of the year nearly half as much again to that, the 426 million. To provide that assurance again, because the purpose of this principally is housing and other assets that will generate income and savings, we remain well within those formal statutory affordability calculations. Now, it doesn't mean there isn't risk. Of course, one can't undertake activity without, but those are carefully judged. I think the last point I'll make, because you asked about inflation and government grants, it remains the case, and I've said this on a number of occasions, as colleagues will know, it is sort of some frustration to be trying to plan the council's finances when I don't know what the government grant will be for next financial year, let alone the sort of 2 or 3 year minimum longer term settlements that, in my view, we ought to have to undertake better financial planning. So it's difficult to really know what the position will look like for 24-25. We adopt the Bank of England forecast for inflation. There are other reputable forecasters out there. One can take different views, but it seems to me entirely logical that we should just adopt the forecasts that they set out. They have. I'll bring in Andrew, perhaps, if I may, to check this. I think their forecast for inflation as of September on the CPI measure falls to 6.3%. And then reduces quite significantly after that falling to the target level of 2% around about the end of the calendar year. As I say, there absolutely are alternative forecasters out there, and some, no little discussion, I think, at the moment of whether some of the permanent features of inflation are becoming perhaps a little more baked into the economy. So we've seen high inflation through a number of one-off events. So there's some suggestion now that some of that may be a little more permanent. Obviously, our real problem is that if government grant, which makes up around about 3/4 of our funding, is less than inflation, then quite clearly, one very quickly starts to come under pressure on the revenue budget, which is why we need to make savings every year. And it is, of course, the case when you borrow money, you enter into a very long-term commitment in order to repay that. So you lose a degree of flexibility, but of course, what you gain aside from the social benefit of that investment now, in this case, particularly, I'll keep housing as the most obvious example of it, but it's not the only one. You generate income from that asset as well as the social good and indeed the saving. I hope that's answered your questions. I'm going to pause for a moment if there's anything that Andrew wants to add, if that's all right, Chair, or he needs to pick me up on.
Just to confirm, Comrade, that the Bank of England forecast for September inflation is 6.3%.
Yep.
Otherwise, I think that was a fairly comprehensive answer.
All right, thank you very much. Is everyone satisfied with the responses to my questions? Are there any other questions? Because it's a really important document, just given the scale of borrowing that is being requested within the envelope for this financial year, but on top of the existing borrowing exposure that we're presently at. If exposure is the right word, because that could infer.
Yeah, I mean, I think technically that would probably be the right word, but I can see that there would be some sort of, plain English. It sounds worse than it technically is. But yeah, I mean, what's being proposed here is a very long-term commitment to enter into that borrowing for good reasons and with the appropriate controls around it, as has been set out and discussed. And it would be remiss of me not to ask, but in light of some recent catastrophes that have been experienced by some local authorities, including Thurrock, where they've had to ratchet up their council tax and roll back on significant investments and capital spend because they've virtually they've become bankrupt, and other places such as Croydon. Are we going bankrupt? No, no, we are not. I think it's really important to emphasise, and it was a point Councillor Ali made at the start as well, but I'll emphasise it. What councils have done, and indeed some private sector institutions have done, and come in trouble as a result. So they've entered into very short-term borrowing and long-term commitment. The problem with that, I mean, your initial interest rate might be attractive, but if of course then rates rise and a year later you need to refinance that, you're then facing much higher costs than anticipated. And so what we're proposing here, we're not borrowing to fund commercial investments from which the income is speculative or highly risky. We're borrowing for service delivery purposes and for housing. Housing is not no risk. I don't want to suggest that there's no risk in this or any other transaction. There is relative security of the income and a high expectation of a significant saving on the taxation budget, and therefore, you can be confident these are reasonable transactions to undertake with the right governance around them. If by agreeing it, you find that, as you put it there, the council is suddenly going bankrupt, far from it.
Okay. Councillor Ali.
Very briefly, Chair, thank you for asking that question. But clearly, we are not anywhere near that situation because we have good financial controls in place, and the fact that we have high level of borrowing is because the previous administration, as I said earlier, continued to borrow. If you look at the, this is the long-term borrowing. We are paying over 40, 50 years. And if you look at the actual accumulation of those, bulk of that actually belongs to the previous administration, particularly during the last couple of years of the last administration. The borrowing has gone up significantly since 2018. This administration had taken a very responsible approach, and our borrowing has been managed exceptionally well. So we are in no risk of anything of that nature at all, that we're going to be going bankrupt. In fact, we're far better positioned than many other organizations. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so colleagues, having heard all of that, we are going to be moving on to the recommendations as set out on big page number 59. For the reasons set out in the report and its appendices, Cabinet is recommended to agree. 2.2, to authorise the Corporate Director of Resources to enter into new long-term borrowing of up to £240 million in order to fund the estimated requirement for the capital programme in the first half of 2023-2024 on the terms set out at section 4 of this report. So is that all agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. We are,
How much we agree?
sorry, just give me a moment.
Break.
I'm just going to suggest we have because that was quite a lengthy cabinet paper. I'm going to suggest that we have a 10-minute break, go into adjournment, and then we reconvene at 11:20. Okay. 10 minutes, 12 minutes, everyone's got. Right? Yeah, thank you, Chair. Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues.
She needs a break.
Sounds to lose you in the previous item. That happened last time.
Yeah, maybe.
They're just cheap.
Yeah.
Do you know
Yeah,
what
they
it
are
is?
cheap biscuits.
They're not a nice one.
Not even real salty.
No,
They're like,
I'm thinking of
yeah.
some, that on them, they're so big.
Nation events, does Charlie and Steve?
Yeah.
And Pepsi Mayor Houghton, but I don't know what ones you're going to. what-
I have no idea what I'm doing. Let's go through it together. We're barking. Two,
6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
1¾ 1.5.
We're live anyway.
Right, okay, we're going to start. Welcome back, colleagues. We adjourned for 15 minutes for comfort break, and we're now jumping on to agenda item 7, which is Active and Sustainable Travel Programme 2023 to 2024. I'm going to be inviting lead member, Councillor James Asser, who is the statutory deputy mayor and cabinet member for environment and sustainable transport, and thereafter we'll invite the corporate director and any other officers to talk to this paper, and then we'll open up to questions. Over to you, Councillor James Asser.
Thank you, Chair. This follows on nicely from the previous paper about capital funding, because this is looking at capital programme and funding active and sustainable travel up to 2031, where we have a £50 million capital programme investment with £5 million allocated for the year ahead. Quite an important set of investment. This kind of complements the work and the funding we already get through Transport for London, through the LIP proposals, and is going to be help delivering on a series of manifesto commitments that we made. And if people wish to refer to it, they can see in the paper 4.2 gives a list of the kind of areas, which include school streets, low traffic neighbourhoods, cycling infrastructure, public realm and neighbourhood improvements, and work on tackling road safety, including tackling misuse of roads, moving traffic contraventions, including driving the wrong way down one-way streets, illegal left turns, etc. And also, most importantly, and something which is a big commitment, is delivering on our promise to deliver a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit across the borough, which we currently have 40% of the roads covered, but looking to match other London boroughs, now the majority, and work with Transport for London to deliver that, to reduce speed overall and make the roads safer, particularly for our children, which fits in nicely with our work on healthy school streets. So a reasonable overview, and I've got Jamie Cook in the room and Murray Woodburn online if anyone wishes to add anything at that.
Thank you, Councillor Asser. The only thing I would add is I think this is really useful for management's part. Let's fund the virtual fluctuations in transport the funding, and we're able to deliver a really meaningful programme.
Okay, are there any other officers that are online that wish to highlight any particular elements of this paper before I open up to questions? And I'm specifically thinking Officer Murray Woodburn.
Yes.
Yes, I do have something to add, Chair. It's just in relation to how the programme has been devised. Obviously, it could have been possible with £5 million of funding to, for example, complete the borough-wide 20-mile-an-hour zone in a single year. But what we've tried to do is develop a balanced programme that delivers tangible progress across a range of schemes and programmes in our active and sustainable transport portfolio. So we will achieve a little bit of everything, I think, is the gist of what the programme is trying to do. So I'll leave it there and address any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you very much. And before I open up to questions, just wanted to formally note for record our thanks and appreciation to Murray Woodburn, who has been our head of transport policies and programmes for a period, but has been with the council for a considerable period of time. Wanted to thank you, Murray, personally, and on behalf of the wider cabinet and the executive, for all of your hard work, diligence and thoughtfulness during the period that you've been with us at Newham Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
It's because he's leaving. You didn't mention that.
Oh yeah, because he's leaving. I'm opening up to questions. I've got Councillor Neil Wilson, and then I've got Councillor Sarah Ruiz.
Thank you very much. Councillor Neil Wilson, Cabinet Member for Health and Adult Social Care. Paragraph 5.3 on big page 78. First bullet point. refers to a consultation and work with our residents to identify the residential roads and areas at the borough that are affected by dangerous driving, rat runs and traffic congestion, for designing of schemes to make those safer, quieter and healthier for all our residents, including those who are wheelchair users and those with visual impairments and disabilities. I'm just checking with officers that that's a cross-reference on big page 83 to Vision Zero. I didn't see it specifically sort of headlined, Chair, in terms of budget allocation, but I'm assuming that's where it is.
Yes, I think there's two sort of separate things there, Councillor Wilson. First of all, I think our working with residents piece is largely on that traffic reduction area, where residents are reporting to us that they have through traffic passing through their area, which is impacting on them. The Vision Zero is a sort of broader programme to address road safety across the borough. Now, admittedly, it does include some of those projects that fall within that first group of working with residents to tackle through traffic in their area. But the Vision Zero element is a little wider than that, in that it also targets locations where we have accident records, which suggest that there are causality factors which we can address at those locations. And also, as Councillor Asser mentioned, the key element of our Vision Zero approach is the 20-mile-an-hour zone, because there have been very compelling figures released recently across London showing the impact of 20-mile-an-hour zone implementation, both on the numbers of accidents and casualties that have arisen, but also on the vast reduction in the severity of those casualties that have arisen following the introduction of 20-mile-an-hour zones. So I think it's covered in both places. I think it would be the short answer to your question, Councillor Wilson.
I can just chip in one thing just for clarity for people on Vision Zero. That's a Mayor of London, London-wide scheme to eliminate all deaths and serious injuries through road collisions by 2041, so over the next 2 decades. Obviously, is going to require local authorities to play a part in that, because obviously a lot of the roads are maintained by us.
Okay, did you have to follow up?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to cross-reference again, I think we had a previous decision made at this full cabinet by the full cabinet in regard to the refresh of the design guide for those with visual impairment, including, the particular paving things. I've forgotten what they're called now.
Tactile paving.
Thank you, Murray. Those issues we've moved on from, because we had to be then compliant with the Disabilities Act. But it is important, I think, that we just cross-reference within, say after we've implemented some of this very badly needed funding, how we can consult with particular, because we have a reference group around disabilities, and they did some really good work. If I say Balfoe, some people in the room will know to whom I refer, an ex-councillor who disability and rights. I think some of that agenda has gone off, so in a sense, our radar sometimes. So it would be helpful to cross-reference when we've got these improvement scheme for the wheelchair users, those with visual impairments and other disabilities, to feel that they're also a consultee and a beneficiary.
Yes, if I can just come back on that quickly, Councillor Wilson. I do know Val very well, and Val has been a key consultee of ours in the past. Unfortunately, Val is, her health is not as it used to be, and she's not able to sort of lead on disabled rights in Newham in the way that she used to. But we have started a partnership with Transport for All, the Transport Equalities charity. And we've been working with them on the equality impact assessments of all of our active and sustainable travel projects. And I would like to say that I think we have developed a bit of an exemplar in that area, in that we have identified a whole package of accessibility and other improvements to help those with protected characteristics in our active and sustainable travel schemes, which are now being delivered as sort of post-scheme additions, if you like. So rather than a fire and forget approach to our schemes where we deliver them and run away, we are looking to continually revisit those schemes and add additional features that have been identified through that engagement with our disabled community. So I would hope I can give you some reassurance on that, Councillor Wilson, that we do have those checks and balances in place.
Thank you very much. That's excellent.
I have a follow-up question to that question, and that responds to that second question, but I'll come to it. Councillor Sarah Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Sarah Lewis, Cabinet Lead Services. Not many of us left in the room, Murray, that will remember Val Hone, but I'm one of them. I'm really pleased to see our continuing commitment to healthy school streets. And I note that we've allocated, I think, I forget how much money it is, but for a further 15. Do we already have schools ready to go for healthy school streets? If so, that's great news. If not, how are we going to progress that? And then how are we going to then look at even more than 15 over a longer period? It's just that they have been really successful, and we'd like to continue that momentum.
Well, thank you, Councillor Ruiz, and certainly I would concur with your comment about how successful they have been. The 21 school streets that we have operational at the moment have produced some really quite compelling outcomes in terms of reduced traffic around the school, but importantly, improved air quality around the schools as well, and also a tangible change in how people travel to and from school, which is also important. Back to your original question, have we got all 15 schools identified? No, we have not yet. We've got about 6 or 7 of those identified. And in terms of that piece going forward, we obviously will continue to engage with schools and try and get them to come on the programme with us. We are, though, starting to notice a tendency for schools who have a car park, for instance, a staff car park within the restricted area. We have noticed that schools are a little reluctant, perhaps, to get involved in the programme where their own staff are going to be impacted by the restrictions that will be imposed for parents. Now, we're a little bit uncomfortable about that, because obviously if we start issuing exemptions to schools, then it does undermine the wider outcomes, and the more vehicles you have driving down the school street, then the less effective it is. So I think there may be a point coming where we have to take a slightly firmer line with some schools where we do have an identified air quality problem. We have residents complaining about the impacts that happen in the mornings and afternoons, but the school themselves are not particularly willing to move forward with us on trying to solve those issues. But it's not a situation we've got to yet. And I think in this 15 schools that we have coming, we will be able to get 15 willing volunteers on board to deliver those proposals. Now, in terms of how we deliver school streets across all of our schools or school schemes across all of our schools, because I think the distinction there is important, because clearly there are not streets that we can close everywhere where there is a school. And, you know, Salisbury School on Romford Road is the classic example of that, where we are not going to be closing Romford Road in the morning or the afternoons anytime soon. So we've got to work with those schools at other ways in which we can address some of those difficulties, reported difficulties, but without necessarily resorting to road closures. And that will be our sort of next generation, if you like, of school street schemes once we've delivered all of those that are technically feasible, to then look at those schemes which look at other ways in which those can be improved, and that's when we start to look at planted screens and other things which will address air quality without necessarily having to close the roads.
Thank you, Murray.
Are there any other questions,
Come back.
colleagues? No? Just question, picking up on a response to Councillor Neil Wilson's second question to assurances vis-a-vis inclusive public realm, highways, etc., for our resident community that may have walking difficulties and other challenges. There's in the corporate plan reflecting the manifesto specific commitments around our public realm, highways, walking pedestrians being enhanced to ensure optimal use for those with and other disabilities alongside elderly and parents with pushchairs and the like. And noting the assurances, does that sufficiently translate to a clear programme of integrating the qualities inclusion aspect of this piece? Assurances are one thing, but I'm just not clear whether that's sufficient.
Yes, I understand the point, Mayor. I think we do have a lot of improvements that are needed around the borough. I think that's fair to say. There were also some mistakes made under the previous administration, some bad calls, I think it's fair to say, in relation to the use of tactile paving, which means that we have a programme to retrofit compliant facilities back where they were erroneously put in place wrongly previously. So what we are trying to do with our active and sustainable transport programme is to systematically tackle those issues where we have a scheme in place. Tackling the rest of the borough will be a longer term process. I think that's fair to say. But along with the Keeping New and Moving programme, which is looking to tackle some of these issues as it moves forward as well, I'm hopeful that we will be able to deliver those changes across the borough in a few years' time. But I cannot give you a precise programme as to when all of our accessibility improvements across the entire borough will be completed, I'm afraid.
Okay, and that will be, sorry, you can't provide clarity because that's subject to ongoing conversations relating to growth items in any future budget. What I'm struggling to understand is, notwithstanding the scale of improvements needed in our public realm, highways, pavements, etc., where we are undertaking works, is there an inclusive approach? Is the inclusivity piece being fully integrated? That's my...
Yes, absolutely. Where there are works taking place, it is an absolutely integral part of our design processes. I can certainly assure you on that.
Okay.
Where we do not have projects ongoing, that will be the slightly longer process to deliver those changes.
Okay, fine. And can I just ask, is there a resident reference group in place alongside engagement with relevant expert bodies, organisations, as it pertains to how we enable an inclusive public environment for those that are visually impaired or with wheelchairs? Yeah.
Not on a programme-wide basis, Mayor, but when we do go into individual projects, we do have those sorts of engagements with local people to establish what the desired outcomes of the individual schemes themselves are. So we do have that engagement on a project-by-project basis, but not at a programme-wide level.
Yeah, I think that's something we should pick up outside of this meeting, because my understanding was that there was a reference group that had been established, because I had the conversation with your predecessor, Jamie Blake, about establishing a resident reference group relating to disabilities and visual impairments, that we made sure that from the outset we're thinking around inclusivity.
Well, we do, I mean, it's worth saying, as I think has been picked up, we do cover that by speaking to people who obviously work on expert level on that and making sure that's included. We haven't done it on a program-wide basis, individually, in the same way that some of them, so for example, we've got a program going forward on looking at changing some of the road changes into sort of more permanent improvements, so removing the plant pots or removing old bollards. So we both speak to local residents about that with the design plans, but as Mario has referred to, we've got a kind of transport inclusivity group that kind of looks at this stuff and works with us in the same way that we've made changes to some other designs we've done based on feedback from the RNIB and people like that. So
we do have a group in place that programs, not just in a.
It's an external body we work with.
Right. Okay. Sorry, Jamie. Cool.
We consider a wider group as well through two avenues really. The first one would be the long-term transport. Enable us to think about our long-term transport aspirations and those that are less able to work as it currently is. The second thing we could consider is the equal payments pledge, which would enable us to consider decluttering of the roadway and highway, so removal of unnecessary infrastructure, being careful about how much infrastructure we're putting in, that might reduce width available to people in either wheelchairs, chairs, and also considering what might be appropriate to tackle footway parking as well.
Okay, fine. I'm gonna bring in Councillor Zulfikar Ali, and then I'm going to suggest that we take further discussions outside of this meeting, bring it to accountability forum meeting, and then we'll move to the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, there's a lot to be done in order to make sure that we are taking into account the qualities impact. But I just wonder whether we have done any audit exercise of the DD Compliance Disability Discrimination Act and see where we are. And, if we're not, we perhaps should be, and that's something that we can include in this going forward.
In terms of a cross-borough audit, I don't believe that's something that we have undertaken thus far. I know what we have done is an audit of certain aspects of our provision. So we have audited our informal and formal crossings in relation to that tactile provision, which we discussed earlier. And we've identified those sites where we need to take forward improvements. But we have not done that exercise every single, on every single part of the borough's road network to identify where, additional dropped curbs, for example, would be advantageous or stuff of that sort. But it's certainly something that the team could look at as part of potentially a second phase of keeping you moving, which would be looking to continue that highways renewal program into further years. So that's certainly something we could pick up offline, Councillor Ali, and discuss with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think that'll be helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not going to labour what needs to be laboured, but I will move to the recommendations.
Can I just add something? I know you mentioned at the beginning, thanks to Murray, but this is his final cabinet, and I think it's worth saying that after 16 years of working on this programme, which is not an easy one, dealing with anything in the public realm always gets a lot of interest in whatever it is you're doing, and whatever it is you're doing half the people disagree with you and half don't at all times, and it's impossible to please everyone. We've done a huge amount of work over the last 4 or 5 years, particularly to improve the public realm, to improve a lot of our roads, and we were talking about health shortages and things. None of that could have happened without Murray's team and with Murray's leadership on that. It's been extremely important in terms of delivering our manifesto commitments, and you are going to be missed. So as the appropriate cabinet member, you're definitely going to be missed from the team. And just again, to reiterate on behalf of the council, thank you for the huge amounts of work and the amount of stress and stuff you've managed to lift off my shoulders as well. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. That's very kind, Councillor Asser. I've enjoyed my time at Newham, and I will certainly miss all of you as well.
Oh, bless you.
Thank you, Murray.
There's some skepticism in the room, Murray.
No, it's genuinely true. You know,
only on the missing aspect.
I've worked in local government before and probably will do again. But I won't get as nice a bunch of elected members.
Oh.
So there we are.
That's okay. For other officers, that's the level of sucking up we're hoping.
No, it really isn't. I think that you heard, James, was a genuine appreciation of those kind comments by Murray.
Absolutely.
And you will be missed. Right, recommendations for the reasons set out in the report and its appendices. The Cabinet is recommended to agree 2.1.1, the draft programme of schemes and interventions to be delivered by the Highways and Sustainable Transport team with council capital funding in 2023 to 24 as set out in Appendix 1, referred to as the draft programme. 2.1.2, delegate authority to the Corporate Director of Environment, Highways and Sustainable Transport in consultation with the lead member for Environment and Sustainable Transport and Parking. It should read lead member for Environment and Sustainable Transport. To 2.1.2.1, commence public consultation on draft programme. 2.1.2.2, consider any consultation responses arising out of the consultation on the draft programme. 2.1.2.3, make such non-material programme amendments to the draft programme as are considered necessary, taking account of the results of public consultation. And 2.1.2.4, implement the draft programme with the inclusion of such non-material programme amendments as are considered necessary. 2.1.3, in the event that the Corporate Director of Environment, Highways and Sustainable Transport in consultation with the lead member for Environment and Sustainable Transport considers that a material programme amendment to the draft programme is necessary, that material amendment will be reported back to Cabinet for further consideration, with the remaining parts of the draft programme proceeding in line with 2.1.2.1 to 2.1.2.4 above.
Sorry about those, Mayor.
It's
Those
okay.
were at the advice of legal. Sorry about that.
Don't worry, no, you don't need to apologise. Okay, do we all agree?
Agreed.
Agreed. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Bye,
All right.
Molly.
Thank you very much. I will see you all in the next couple of weeks. Bye.
Okay, we are now moving to the agenda item 8, which is the submission of strategic outline business case for Beckside. And I'll be introducing the report, and then I'm going to be inviting Vicky Clark, the interim corporate director for inclusive economy and strategic housing. And then we have Officer Ellery Thomas, who is located within the Community Wealth Building Division of Inclusive Economy and Strategic Housing Directorate, and she is the Economic Strategy Lead Officer. So, colleagues, the paper outlines a key milestone in the work that NUM's been undertaking since 2020, alongside our colleagues in the Royal Borough of Greenwich, Transport for London, the GLA, Homes England, and the principal landowners that have the ownership of the land, obviously, across the geography that we're talking about, which is situated both in the borough of Greenwich as well as in Newham. And in the Newham context, it's the Beckton Riverside geography, and in the Royal Borough of Greenwich, it's the Thames Mead area. And this essentially is a paper that's been brought for formal approval prior to us agreeing formally as a local authority that the business case that's been developed as part of that partnership will be submitted to government. Now, a key element of enabling the delivery of significant housing in our part of the Beckton, Riverside and Thamesmead programme is in the south of the borough, and it will require much needed investment in around transport infrastructure to enhance activity. And the paper just sets out the partnerships proposed. Preferred option is a DLR extension from Gallions Reach to Thamesmead via Beckton Riverside, and it will include a rapid transit mode of public transport relating to buses that will be situated at Thamesmead. And by virtue of us submitting this outline business case alongside other partners, as previously mentioned, and subject to the agreement of government, it would bring a really important transport infrastructure piece that could potentially unlock some 25 to 30,000 homes overall, and across back parts of the rural borough of Greenwich and Newham, and will help initiate or give the help support potentially the largest regeneration project at Beckton Riverside. The Beckton Riverside piece, subject to all the requirements of the local planning authority pre-application and application process, and that will be determined by the planning committee at the appropriate point once the applicant submits their plans. As many of you know, in the context of Beckton Riverside and the Beckton area of Newham, we have already the Gallions Reach shopping retail centre. We have a important neighbourhood that is being elevated through the current local plan review process underway, and we have ambitious plans to improve that part of the borough after a period of long neglect and ignoring. And it is going to be really important for some of our ambitions, for instance, with regards to the Beckton Parks master plan. So in essence, the paper sets out the key headlines around the business case for the Beckton, Riverside and Thamesmead public transport business case that will be submitted. And in terms of next steps, once we give approval, the partnership will continue working in finalising this case that will then be submitted to government. I think it's also important for me to bring to everyone's attention here that this is one of two crucial public transport infrastructure programmes that we will be supporting here at Newham Council, the other one being the Stratford Station expansion programme. And we're currently working through with partners on that programme, and the principal partners being Network Rail, Transport for London as well, and the London Legacy Development Corporation. So it's important not to read this paper coming to this cabinet as a administration preference for Beckton Riverside and Thamesmead public transport programme over the Stratford expansion. Both are important to the administration, and both will be advocated for in our engagement with national government and with our partners as well, including TfL. So on that note, I'm going to be inviting Vicky Clark to say any additional words, and as appropriate, we'll invite the officer, Ellery Thomas, to also emphasise any particular points that Cabinet and the wider executive need to note before I open up to questions. Over to you, Vicky.
Thanks, Mary. Apologies, actually, Larry's on leave this week, so
okay,
won't be available. I think you covered the case of this very well, but essentially, yes, this investment will enable hopefully a different future effect and enable more of the town centre, a better environment that allows people to spend more of their time enjoyably outside, for it to be more sustainable and less carbon dominated, and crucially, potentially 10,000 national use homes. The proposed route map for people who are interested found at Appendix 2, and the full benefits of Beckton are set out in section 4.4 of the without been consulting on the proposal, because the proposals that this transport investment would support and enable, and the details of that consultation, I think that in section 7 of the paper, sorry. And those have the general feedback from members of the public has been extremely positive on those. And as you all know, I'm sure the previous experience, big things of transport infrastructure are very, very expensive, and therefore they require a significant amount of preparatory work. So with an estimated cost between 700 million and 1.2 billion in 2021 prices, so somewhere just under the billion, hopefully, in total cost. Though this strategic outline business case is now ready, there is a further phase of far more detailed planning and options appraisal to take place. That would cost 10 to 12 million, and this paper recommends that Newham contribute 500,000 toward that over a 4-year period. Just to draw attention to the benefits of that work, those finance comments, and it's this is 125,000 funded from capital feasibility resource already available to the community welfare team, and that future years be identified by the annual capital programme assessment process.
Okay, thank you very much. Just also one thing before I open up to questions, the supplementary paper that was published, could you just advise, in the interest of transparency, what the change amendment was?
So apologies for the full short form case, has quite a lengthy document with a fair amount of detail in it, and also talks about some of the other options that could have been considered instead. Quite late in the process, TfL sent through the shorter document about the option, which they suggested might be more digestible for general readership, because some of the officers involved were unexpectedly away, and because the documents were named, the recommendation of which documents were penned got lost somewhere in the process, hence we appended the larger one and then so.
Okay, fine. So there's no change. Basic.
No, there's the latter one's a summary.
Okay, fine. Right. So that's all been noted. I'm going to open up questions. Colleagues, any questions? I've got Councillor Anne Easter, Councillor Joshua Garfield.
Thank you. I'm Anne Easter. I'm one of the elected members for Royal Albert Ward, which is slightly further away from the wards considered here. But I really welcome this because I've been very moved by the lack of obvious, easy transport for our people in the very south of the borough. And I'd like to know how you see this unlocking our vision for the south of the borough. I think, I imagine it will be that people will be able to travel more quickly and more easily, because will it be connected up?
Yeah, so it will join up with the main DLR route back into Stratford. So that if you look at the diagram on appendix, at appendix 2, you can see that it sort of branches off the line that terminates at Beckton. I think that trains will split off and serve one or the other. But the purpose of it is twofold, really. So firstly, yes, it will attract more people to want to live in that area because they'll have a more straightforward way to get into and get out and about. I think the Galleons Reach area is quite heavily focused on cars. So the other thing it will do will enable people to get out and about there without using their car so much, which will reduce pollution, make it a more pleasant place to live. So the idea is to replace the kind of car-led setting at the moment with one which more resembles the traditional town centre, if you like. So able to walk about with respect. That's the intention, as well as I say. There are the amount of transport accessibility that you have, public transport accessibility determines to a significant degree how many new homes our planners are enabled to allow. So by having this extra transport, they will be allowed to permit more homes.
Thank you. So it's a win-win. Really. Thank you very much.
Okay, councillor Joshua Garfield.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of questions. Firstly, I note that were this extension to be built, it would be an excellent connection. Or as a newer connection, we know that we significantly lack sufficient river crossings east of Tower Bridge. I know that some are being constructed, but not necessarily with our visions for sustainability at the forefront. This crossing would indeed satisfy that ambition. It would be a sustainable one. It would be public transportation between the two. However, if one wanted to walk or cycle a distance that's you'd think relatively easy to, I think the river at that point is 150, 200 meters wide. You still would have to travel all the way to the Woolwich Foot Tunnel from Thamesmead, which would increase your walk or your cycle. Are there any provisions at this point, given that this is in effect a feasibility paper and a business case, it's quite early on, are there any plans for a pedestrian or cycle crossing roughly at this point between Newham and Greenwich to supplement the DLR extension?
Can't speak to that at the moment. Obviously, this is the proposed DLR thing is on route.
Yeah.
So I'm not a transport, same with Ross Murray actually, but I'm not a transport expert. So I don't think it would be straightforward to run a pedestrian directly alongside it. The mayor is the co-chair of the board that looks at this, so she may be able to advise whether there've been any discussions on that at the meeting.
There haven't been any explicit discussions, and that's because the focus has been on the principal connectivity infrastructure, but it will have been considered in the context of other modal transport elements in the round that we can provide in another place. Some more detail on that?
That would be good. I know, for example, cable car that connects Newham and Greenwich, if one takes their bicycle, it's free because there is no other river crossing for cyclists at that point. You can't go through the Blackwall Tunnel. So with a bicycle, that crossing is free. I wonder if something similar could be introduced at this point, whereby the DLR ride from Thamesmead to Beckton, if you are on a bike, would be free as opposed to paying the fare.
You free at certain hours.
That's true. You can't travel at peak, I think.
No.
So you can't commute to work for free.
No. Well,
It's a leisurely ride.
Yeah, it might even be the other way round, actually.
Possibly.
That you can use it for commuting, but not for leisure.
I suspect that whatever the regime is in place across London, that will be the same to apply to this new transport infrastructure piece. But we can certainly bring a fuller discussion in terms of impact of this transport infrastructure to the wider transport network in that part of the borough and that part of London. But Councillor James Asser.
It was a separate question on that, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, fine. No, so mine, it sort of follows on from that around kind of DLR and transport extensions. Because obviously this DLR extension is quite important both for us in terms of the Beckton Riverside development, but also for Greenwich and their planned development south the river and their link up with their proposed bus transit scheme. I think there are two things for me that I'm keen, because obviously we are early in the stages and that gives us chances to kind of keep shaping this, is too often with transport projects, kind of opportunities get closed off quite early and a bit of longer term planning. So two things for me. Firstly is, given the scale of potential Beckton Riverside development, I still think there's potential need for more than one DLR station, and given how close they are together normally, there's an opportunity, and I'd like that to make sure we kind of keep raising that with TfL as a potential opportunity. The other one, which I know we've spoken about at other times, is the east of Newham north-south has particularly poor transport connections. Most of our lines are east-west because they're going into central London. We're solved on the west of the borough with the Jubilee line extension, but the east of the borough still very much relies on buses, which aren't always reliable. It's crossing the North Circular. There's often a lot of traffic problems. There is an opportunity here further down the line for potential extension for more round towards Barking. And so I think when any planning is done on that, making sure that that kind of development is done in a way that future spurs north from that can be included. And I think so making sure we've got that future planning is going to be quite important in terms of longer term planning and travel in the east of the borough. As Councillor Easter said, it's been a bit of the borough which has been poorly served because of the decline in population since the docks closed, but now we're rebuilding that, making sure we've got that in place. I think for longer term planning would be useful. I'm keen to raise it at this point to make sure that, you know, we don't lose opportunities because of perhaps not looking 30 years ahead.
Councillor Garfield.
Thank you, Matt. My second question is about the comments made regarding the Stratford station upgrade. On the face of it, extending a monorail, which is essentially what the DLR is relatively simple, and I suppose building a tunnel from Newham to Greenwich is again a relatively simple project, and I would imagine quite a bit cheaper than the really complex work that is envisioned Stratford station upgrade. And your comments about not prioritising one over the other, but the fact that Stratford station is currently dangerously at and even over at some points capacity, and that there is a potential for a new entertainment venue to we have some sort of assurance either from yourself or from officers that there isn't a chance that this piece of work would begin and complete before we've even come to address what's needed for application.
I can give you an assurance in terms of the administration's position as it pertains to Stratford station plans, expansion plans, and the business case that's being drafted and will be submitted in the next couple of months to national government will have the most vocal, robust support of the council as part of the joint submission that we will be doing with TfL, Network Rail and London Legacy Development Corporation. And similarly, I can give you an assurance that we will be emphasising the importance to us of Stratford Station to TfL in a way that ensures that they understand that we're not, through our support of this, diminishing our interest in Stratford Station. And both this business outline, which will need some final finessing before it's submitted to government, plus the Stratford Station business case, which is in the final state being finalised, and it's going to be submitted in a couple of months' time. So it'll actually be, I understand it's going to be submitted before this one. We will be making a very strong lobbying case to government because it's all in the hands of HM Treasury, ultimately in terms of what they decide. And part of what we want to ensure is that TfL don't inadvertently give preference to one scheme over the other. And we've been making that case to TfL colleagues as well as GLA colleagues. Don't know if you want to add anything else. It directly answered the specifics of your question because we can't.
That was really helpful.
Yeah. All right, cool. Are there any other questions? No. Okay, I'm going to be moving on to the recommendations of this, which is on big page number 87. For the reasons set out in the report and its appendices, the Mayor and Cabinet are asked to 2.1.1 approve the submission of the strategic outline case for the Thamesmead and Beckton Riverside Public Transport Programme to government by Transport for London on behalf of the programme partners. Case is summarised in Appendix 1. 2.1.2 approve £500,000 contributions to the programme over the next 4 years, subject to details as part of overall funding package of £10 to £12 million by government and other stakeholders in order to enable further feasibility work for public transport interventions and develop a comprehensive business case consents programme. Is that all agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to be moving on to agenda item 9, the Stratford Youth Zone permission to contract of cultural operator. So colleagues, this is another milestone in the journey that has been our flagship youth zone in Stratford. And for those long-standing members of the executive, you know that this is one of a number of cabinet papers that has come through. And just to advise that as part of the transition of that council asset in the form of a very prominent and special of the council, we have been working very hard to ensure that the vision that we have for the Youth Empowerment Service manifests in the inspirational way that it should for our young people. The recent period, we've had a interim operator to manage the space with us because we have pursued a ambition to transform Stratford Youth Zone's building into a flagship youth zone offer that has a specific focus on the performing arts and creative and cultural sectors. And the arrangements with the interim cultural operator are nearing an end. So the Youth Empowerment Service went out for a soft market testing process initially, and then a procurement. And this paper sets out the awarding of contract to a successful partner. Now, I needed to emphasize that there is a part of this paper is exempt, and if there are any questions that colleagues want to ask on the exempt appendix, we're going to need to do that in private session. But in the interim, just wanted to commend the report to all of Cabinet and happy to answer any specific questions. I'll also invite my officer colleagues, Tim Aldrich in the first instance. We also have Esther Baker from the Youth Empowerment Service to talk about specifics. And then just to advise that there are some important features that have changed since the last time the interim operator contract was discussed at a full meeting of Cabinet. And the timeframe for this contract award is 10 years, and the annual management fee is fixed at £503,000. I'm going to pause there, invite Tim Aldrich, and then I will bring in Esther. Tim?
Yes, Tim Aldridge, Corporate Director for Children and Young People's Services. So as has been stated, the report seeks the approval, excuse me, of Cabinet to procure a provider to manage the Stratford Youth Zone, and the procurement process has identified the University of East London as the provider. The board is to manage and operate the performance elements of the Stratford Youth Zone. These are quite complex arrangements and requires a provider with skills and expertise in this area. So that this cultural partner will provide a programme of creative and performing arts, including drama, music, arts and dance, which aligns quite closely with the Newham Creative Future strategy. The contract, as has been stated, is initially for 10 years. The overall cost is £733,000 per annum. which 503,000 goes to the provider. And the aim is to go live in September 2023. Some of the positives in terms of the offer from this particular provider, University of East London, through the process, they highlighted their ability to raise additional funding to support these programmes, to deliver high quality cultural activities, including reaching children and young people with special educational needs, including neurodiversity. The provider has committed to operate the building in a carbon neutral way by 2030, and has also committed to invest £1.9 million in the facilities over the life contract. The provider can also support the provision of student-led peer-to-peer educational workshops and facilitate pathways through to higher education and employment, including access to a range of creative courses, including science, technology, engineering, arts and mathematics, and also access to a range of apprenticeships across University of East London, and there's a significant choice of those available. So that's all I wanted to add there, but I was going to invite Esther Baker in to see if Esther has anything else you want to add as part of the introduction, Esther.
No, thank you, Tim. You've covered all of the key points.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, colleagues, I'm going to open up to questions. Right, I've got Councillor Caroline Adaja, Councillor Sarah Ruiz, Councillor Carly Mee Parkway.
Councillor Caroline Adaja, Deputy Cabinet for Community Wellbuilding, Business Enterprise and Future Works. I want to say this is a very amazing, fantastic piece of program, partners in UL, and from my perspective of community wellbeing within the borough, I think building of the youth in terms of apprenticeship, internship and work experience, I think it's very, very crucial for them to have this to actually prepare them for future work. And my question here is, because looking at the page, I'm looking at page 4, paragraph 3.8. There's a code that says 5,000 work experience placement. My question here is, what accreditable is our partners as well as organization in terms of providing 5,000 work experience yearly? Part of the scheme, I believe, that will actually empower the youth and to help them with future work. So this is one of the questions. I've got another one. To actually wait for the answer.
Yeah, unless you want to answer the second one.
Okay, let's
yeah.
Just want to microphone the second one. So
okay.
Okay. Are you happy for me to?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so let me start and then I'll bring Esther in. Yes, you're absolutely right. Really important that these opportunities also has the potential pathway into work experience and work through apprenticeships. I think the 5,000 number quoted in paragraph 3.8 relates to a whole variety of both work experience placements, internships and apprenticeships across all of the UAL campuses. So these are already opportunities that exist, and the aim through this particular concessionary contract is to provide the pathway when people are engaged in these creative activities into some of those opportunities that already exist. But Esther, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, just to say that the the opportunities do already exist, but this enables users of the youth zone to access them in a way they previously may have not or may not have thought about.
Thank you. And in terms of the resident in terms of newer residents, how we show in terms of the workplace needs, how open would they be to newer residents in terms of I mean, I know you said UL and the partnership, it's open. So my question basically is how we show that the workplace will be open to newer residents, basically, that makes sense? Or how many of you we have opportunity to actually tap into this particular program?
No, thank you. And so again, my understanding is currently those who both to new residents, but also residents from other boroughs as well. I think, as Esther mentioned, the aim really here is to build that pathway between those young people who are using youth zone and involved in these creative opportunities and those sort of work and apprenticeship opportunities that exist. So through strengthening relationship and the pathway, the aim would be that more young people from across who are resident in Newham, who are using the youth zone, have access to those opportunities. But Esther, anything you want to add there?
No, that's it. Thank you, Tim.
Do we have a percentage in terms of?
I don't think we have a precise percentage, but I think it's the aim would be through strengthening that pathway that would increase the chances for those young people to be successful in accessing opportunities. But we can, again, if there's I'll ask Esther and colleagues to just follow up on that question, if that's okay, and we'll provide any further information.
Okay, so I'm going to be asking Councillor Sarah Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Sarah Lewis, Cabinet Lead for Children's Services. Not to labour that point that Councillor Ajay has made, I actually think that is required. We should see it in the KPIs because it's all very well saying this is open. I'd really like to hold them down to a percentage of young people that they will work with. I mean, I know it's open, but actually a lot of UEL students are not new students. I just think we need to tighten that up a bit. The other thing I noted, I can't find it now, of course, is that they're going to encourage business space, and I want some assurance that this is primarily going to be a centre for young people, not filled up with business units and stuff like that. I just think that, you know, we've been had once before, we don't want to be had again. And so it is primarily a youth zone with added extras, but I'm not sure where I would want to see it being opened up for business units, not unless they are called young people enterprises. My next question is, when they talk about maintenance or whatever of the building, I think it says ensuring facilities are maintained to a high standard, but then they only talk about cleaning, really. Is that repairs and maintenance or just painting and decorating? You know why I'm asking that question. And then my final question is around the commitment community to use the building. I'm assuming it's communities who have an interest in dance and drama and arts, but I would really like to bottom that out a bit, because I think I'd like to know what the preferential rates would be, et cetera, because it's really important that we don't lose that as a facility for other people to use for as a art space. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to defer to Esther on those, if I may, Esther.
Of course. So your first question in relation to the building staying primarily as a youth zone, this has been tied down in the terms of use for the building. So the provider is able to use the building very freely up until 3 o'clock, but then from 3 o'clock onwards, the youth zone has the majority use of space. And again, in half terms and school holidays, the youth zone has the majority use of space. So it fundamentally remains open to young people when young people are not in school. So I think that answers that question. In regards to repairs and maintenance, the specification splits that up. So as the council, we are responsible for the capital repairs and maintenance, but the general day-to-day repairs, including painting, decorating, and minor repairs, falls to the provider to complete. And they are also responsible for all of the technical equipment, so the lighting, the sound systems, and all of the theatre equipment. And your final question, commitment to community use. Yes, we are aiming to keep all of the current community groups in there, and through our mobilisation, we will have those conversations with the provider to ensure that the groups we currently have adults drama group on a Saturday, we have some dance groups and a choir. We would be aiming to keep all of those groups. The groups that service young people mainly happen in youth zone time, so that's fairly within our control, but I'm sure we can maintain the adult drama group on a Saturday.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. When it comes to an effective youth service for any borough, really, as always, the devil is in the detail. And I wondered, given the key performance indicators listed in this tender, I imagine the conversation would have been had with the provider as to what's expected of them. The value of the contract at 700,000 a year, with the potential to extend to a decade, is possibly £7 million worth spending. What I really like to understand, and what I imagine colleagues and much of the public would like to understand, that detail, what we get as a local authority for every pound spent, how many young people are accessing the services for every pound spent. It's something that I currently don't see in this detail. I know we asked in a different place for these KPIs, and I'm glad that we've got them, but still, I would really like to be in a position where a year to 5 into the contract, us or whomever replaces us at another election can probe on the value of the contract. Is it serving this many young people per pound spent? Are these interventions being made that has a positive impact on their lives and the outcomes of their experiences in education and in those extracurricular activities that are so important for a well-rounded service? Do we have any of those numbers, and can we use them to hold the provider to account at a future date?
Can I just say a couple of things? One, you wouldn't get that level of detail in a cabinet paper. Number two, those would be captured in the service area performance requirements that would then be rigorously assessed as part of a cabinet accountability model. 3, they would also be captured as part of the quarterly performance reporting process that we have across every single service area, across all portfolio responsibilities in terms of outcomes we want to achieve. And then 4th, they would adhere to the contract management regime that's in place for the council and as applied to every single contract that we hold with any third party, albeit obviously there will be specificities in light of the requirements of the contract. So in short order, yes, there would be a report back to the team whereby the outcome and the impact will be tracked and assessed. And if the contractor, provider, operator is not meeting the requirement is within the contract framework, the ability for the local authority to pick that up directly and if required, because if it's not improving or if it's not going on course, then I imagine provision to extract from the contract in any case. Tim?
Yeah, no, just to add to that, I know there's been some previous conversations about the provider having a business plan, and within that business plan, I would expect all of those measures around impact, activity, quality to be set out, and therefore the ability to examine that for value for money. And through those contract management processes, the ability to scrutinise and review the impact, the quality, the value of the provider. Clearly, within that building, there is both the arts and creative provision by this, but also the other youth activities. So it's important to think about, I suppose, the value in the round of the building and the provision in both of those elements. So yeah, I think agreeing the need to be really clear about sort of activity and quality and impact. But Esther, I don't know if you want to add in there in terms of the contract management processes.
Yep. So just to come back to your first point, Councillor Garfield, about the KPIs, we haven't actually sat down with the provider as yet because we need your permission to award this contract. Once we have that, we will then work through the mobilisation plan where we will confirm all of these KPIs. We are happy to add, as the bottom of the Appendix 2 says, that we are able to add relevant KPIs over the life of the contract. We are happy to add anything that you feel we should to tighten this up. We will then be going forward with monthly contract meetings where we touch base with them, and more in-depth deep dive quarterly meetings throughout the life of the contract, just to ensure that it remains on track.
Okay, is that all right?
Well, with that in mind, wondered if Esther couldn't help us with what the ambition is. I understand that we can't have those KPIs in place right now because we have to sit down with the provider, but do we have an outline ambition for what we would get sort of per pound spent that we hope they're able to meet?
Esther, are you able to provide a response? And there's also the appendix attached to this paper. And are you saying the appendix that's attached to the paper isn't sufficient?
No, Esther has outlined quite clearly why the appendix is as limited as it is, and that is because we cannot detail KPIs until we sat down with the provider. That I accept, but I wondered in that regard, if I pivot the question to being, what's our ambition as a local authority providing this youth service, that we would get X number of young people accessing it for this amount of money?
Okay, Esther, I mean, I can talk in general terms, and Tim.
Esther, do you want to give any detail in terms of the scale of the ambition as set out in the tender process, for example?
Yeah, I could also just go further back to that. So as part of our expansion in 2019 and in 2020, our commitment as a youth empowerment service was to engage 20% of children aged 9 to 19 or up to 25 with SEND. So that would be our ongoing commitment for this project, that we could engage 20% of Newham across the youth zones.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Tim?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Yes. All right, fine. I'm gonna take Colin Lee Parkway as the final question, and then I'm going to be going to recommendations because we're really stretched for time. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll make my contributions brief. Just looking at the papers, and firstly, just thank you. Thank you for the work that's gone into this. This has been a long time coming. But I do just want to ask a couple of questions. So just in regards to what this tender talks to, what this would look like for the young people of Newham, I just want to ask a question, maybe it's to you, Esther, in regards to how does this work with a collaboration with other partners within the borough. And I'm thinking really about the E20 landscape and actually the vast amounts of organisations coming into that area. How is it that this provision will ensure that our young people get the very best of both worlds? That's my first question. And my second question, and this is more for the public watching. So just thinking about, let me just check where I've got it. Just thinking about 4.1 in the document, it talks to the 10-year contract, the option to extend for 5 years, and then it talks around suitable break clauses. And I just wanted for the general public and for those of us in the room, what does that mean? What is a suitable break clause? And why is it we would need that? And can you just also explain in layman terms why it's for such a long period?
Yeah, that's fine.
Majority of those questions were to you, Tim, apart from them.
No, you're happy for me to?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think just to highlight the principle that although the University of East London is the proposal is it will be the contracted provider specifically within the Stratford Youth Zone, and we've sort of talked about why we need that expertise from that provider. That's not exclusive, i.e. that would not prevent Stratford Youth Zone or other elements of the Youth Empowerment Service engaging with other partners across E20. And you're absolutely right, there's some great, brilliant opportunities to engage with others, and absolutely wouldn't see that as mutually exclusive at all. In terms of the break clause, I mean, with any contract, there is the opportunity if that contract is not effective, for there to be a break clause, and I'll invite Esther in just a moment to say a bit more about that. But in terms of the length of the contract, I think given sort of undertaking, given the sort of the challenges of finding the right provider with that expertise, that length of contract was seen to be a requirement in order to attract them to this. And we've talked a little bit about some of the longer term ambitions of that provider, particularly around investing in some facilities and really building sort of pathways between the broader offer from UEL and what can be delivered in the Stratford Youth Zone. But Esther, I don't know if you want to say anything more detailed either about the break clause or anything else in that question.
Yes, so we would potentially want to break with the partnership if they were failing to meet the KPIs, if there were financial reasons where they couldn't uphold their end of the contract. That's what we mean by a suitable break clause in this instance. And again, for the reason specifically the 10 years was because we hoped that we would attract Arts Council funding, which comes around once every 3 years for a period of 3 years. And we've just missed 2020, it came out 2022. So it won't be until late 2025 we could apply again. And that would, so that's the reason we've gone for 10 years in this instance.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you, too. I'm not going to take I am going to take a question from Councillor Zulfikar Ali. Sorry, I know that you had a question that you wanted to ask just in terms of the budget allocation for this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. It's good to see that under the interim arrangements, we have 5,000 people coming through the door, which is really great. And we are now, 500 a week, that is, and that makes about 26,000 a year. And the new arrangements suggesting 5,000 apprentices or internships, etc. And I just wonder how many of those 26,000 will actually benefit from that. The second question is the costs seem to have gone up, almost doubled since the last procurement exercise. Can we have some rational explanation? I know the inflation has gone up, the contractual costs have gone up as well as maintenance, but there's a reference in here. So could we have some further clarification on that?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Councillor Ali. Yeah, no, in terms of the numbers of young people who will benefit from some of those opportunities, I think that's hard to say at this point in time. And as Esther's already stated, through some of that more detailed discussion with the provider, we would want them to try and quantify how many of those individual young people might benefit from some of those opportunities. In terms of the cost of the contract, again, I will defer to Esther on this one, but I think it's clear that we had to review the value of the contract given the outcome of the previous exercise. So it needed to be attractive enough and realistic enough to attract the right provider to this contract. But Esther, I don't know if you want to add.
So yes, we reviewed it with our current interim partners, and feedback from them was that actually what we were offering wasn't attractive to any arts organisation. Most are charities, and if we were asking them to cover all of the costs of the building based on, we were putting in 230k previously on an assumption that the building would cost around 460, when in reality the building does cost 730 a year at present to run. We were setting out an unrealistic expectation for partners, and so it just went through a big period of review, looked at all of the costs, the current cost of living, the current cost of utilities. Our utilities costs have gone up by about 100k, and so we had to take all of those factors into consideration to again present a more attractive offer.
If I may come back to, I mean, if UEL have already infrastructure in place, facilitate, right, is there not any scope for that partnership to actually offset some of the additional costs?
So through this contract, the council are committed to putting in 503,000 a year for the next 10 years. The provider will pick up any and all costs above that. So the cost of inflation effectively sits with the new partner. So UEL have also committed within their bid to ensure the building is net carbon by 2030, and they will pay for the works to get us to that point.
Very quickly again, what demonstrate to us that 503 is the value for money? How do we know that?
So can I just intervene here? There is a value for money lens that Finance and Resources will rightly apply. And there's a value for money lens that different parts of the council will apply in terms of our outcome propositions that we've set out in the performance, and both the financial and social value of any endeavour that we embark on and we approve as a cabinet executive is done through it by that framework, and we examine it in the round. We don't adopt a purist cost X will equal return on our investment Y, because that will be a really rudimentary and crude way of doing things. And for want of a better word, bean counters, that may not be satisfactory, but for someone with a heart as well as a head, for example, Tim, may be sufficient and better. I'm sorry, I'm really throwing you in it, aren't I? And Conrad, I am no way suggesting you're a bean counter.
No, but that's precisely what I wanted to hear, Jay, because clearly every single person that we divert from unemployment or from other activities into employment, gainful employment, is going to have societal benefits. So there's social, economic, and clearly a happiness element as well. So yeah, absolutely, that's great.
And also just to advise before I pass over to Tim, every single area of the council will be held to account with regards to the budget envelope that they're assigned, and outcomes are expected, including outcomes relating to proper, diligent contract management.
Yeah, just to say thank you, Mayor, absolutely echoing all of those points. This is an investment to enrich young people and to improve their outcomes. But also we've gone through a whole contracting process and procurement process. We've gone through soft market testing. we've looked at what's realistic in terms of how much it costs to operate the building, and we've sought advice from colleagues in procurement and finance as well. So, to the best of our ability, this feels like the right approximate figure, and clearly, as we said, we're through those further conversations with the provider, we will do our utmost to ensure we get the best value for money possible.
And is it worth at this point also emphasising the value that we're already gaining through this procurement, which is of not insignificant monetary value? If you want to elaborate on that, or Esther.
Yes, so UEL have committed to spend £1.9 million in the building over the next 10 years, upgrading the AV equipment, so the lighting, the sound works in the building, to ensure that it's a fit for purpose, state of the art theatre space. So the community can come and see high quality performances in the borough on their doorstep at cheaper, affordable rates.
Thank you very much. Watch this space, and I will also ensure that a year on in, there is an appropriate update to all members and cabinet, not necessarily a formal cabinet meeting, but just to provide that additional tier of public assurance. I'll discuss with officers. Right, recommendations, big page number 123. For the reasons set out in the report and appendices, the Mayor and Cabinet are recommended, following a comprehensive tendering process, to agree to award the concession contract to the University of East London to operate and manage Stratford Youth Zone for a period of 10 years with an option to extend for 5 years at an estimated contract value of £733,000 per annum. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Now, colleagues, I am going to be asking for a break of 3 minutes for a chair switchover. So, Clerk to the committee, could you kindly just pause on the live broadcast?
I'll pause it, Chair, but I will put up a screen.
Okay, and mute it. Is that done? Not yet. Okay.
Let me just turn the sound up.
Agreement. We're back. Very welcome. Hello. Anybody potentially watching at home, you'll have noticed the mayor has vanished.
That's right, the mayor.
The mayor has had to step out for another meeting, so I'll be taking over the rest of the meeting chairing. We only have one item left on the agenda, which is domestic abuse community services, permission to procure. I think I'm looking at Councillor Wilson and Councillor Khan.
Thank you very much, Chair. So Councillor Neil Wilson, Cabinet Member for Health and Adult Social Care, and Councillor Mumtaz Khan, my deputy. In July 22, this Cabinet agreed our domestic abuse strategy for the 3 years till 2025, and that adopts a values-led and a public health whole community approach. So that's reflecting our understanding together with others, particularly in legislative piece with the Domestic Abuse Act. The domestic abuse has many far-reaching consequences, extend beyond individual survivor to their family, their friends, the local communities and society as a whole. Now the focus, and I want to stress, this is merely a permission to procure report. The focus on this procurement is to maintain a high quality offer, but also embracing extra flexibility, which is very important. If we're adapting a needs approach, it needs to have that flexibility to adapt to needs as and when money becomes available as well. And we hope that's happening in the form of grant. The Domestic Abuse Act of 2021 has created the first statutory legal definition of domestic abuse, and that is in order to ensure that domestic abuse is both fully understood by the wider community, considered unacceptable throughout society, and is actively challenged wherever it happens across both the statutory agencies like ourselves, but in public attitudes generally. Now that act has created a genderless, a broad definition recognizing that people of all genders and ages are affected by domestic abuse. It's our expectation that the provider, and this is a pre-procurement report, will be a key contributor to achieving those strategic goals, but they would be leading by expertise, they would be passing on knowledge, skills and values and their ambition to make a real difference to improving the safety and welfare of survivors in Newham. We expect the service to provide a consistent, that crucial word, consistent both in terms of response time, but also in quality of service, a sustainable response to domestic abuse across the borough, wherever it occurs within the borough. There has been concentrations in recent months in certain areas, but wherever domestic abuse happens in the borough and in partnership with obviously the local services. Now, this is in accordance with community wealth building ambitions and our domestic abuse strategy's whole community public health approach. So we're proposing a model where a lead provider works as an anchor, really. It's a spoke, anchor and wheel or whatever, that spoke, hub and anchor spokes or whatever it's called, where the lead provider works in partnership with local voluntary community and faith sector organizations, which often have real demonstrable links with communities. So the lead provider works in partnership with those to ensure that the domestic abuse services are available to all our communities. And the success of the model, because in other places and indeed in this very cabinet chair, we've been rather and quite rightly talking about outcomes and key performance. In the success of this model will be based on community combining that specialist expertise of domestic abuse service providers with that community knowledge. So what the Cabinet is asked to seek approval for is to re-procure domestic abuse community services for a 5, then a possible 2-year extension. It's a 5+1+1 model, with the new service commencing on the 1st of January 2024. And that new service will offer support to residents of all genders, all identities and cultural heritage, age 16+. Support provided will be person-centered, so on the individual focus, culturally appropriate, and I can't stress that enough, and gender identity specific, with the central purpose of maximizing the individual safety and promoting their recovery from all forms of domestic abuse. So you'll note in paragraph 5.3, it's a 7.3 million contract we're looking here over the fully extended term of 7 years. And in relation to that, paragraph 2.7 says, in recognition of inflationary pressures and in line with our benchmarking of wages paid for roles across the sector, we're proposing an increase of 50k in the first instance as applied to the contract. procuring with the current budget may result in a lack of response from the market because the costs are going up all the time. We've talked about inflationary pressures and also the very real need to have high quality service providers and by definition, trained, fully qualified staff. A reduction in the number of staff could happen if we didn't put 50k in as an upfront one, and there could be a reduction in the range of services. So this increase of 50k in the first instance will be met from the public health grant and some increase from external funding from the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, which I'll refer to, if I say any more in future bits, as OHID. That's quicker to say. And we can use the OHID grant to use to fund for sex working provision. I just wanted to finish by saying that paragraphs 5 in section 5, and both of us will be here to answer questions, there's really a new core package offer to concentrate on with the whole aim of the service on 5.10 and 5.11 talks about the interventions that we are doing in terms of domestic violence advocates, casework, coordination of the MAREC panel, the harmful practices of multiple disadvantaged services, and finally, on page 143, the category of help in terms of adult social care integrated work, linking with the homeless and rough sleeping strategy, and linking with LGBTQ plus communities and increased sex worker support. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, I know you've got a number of officers. Anyone got just to add anything?
No, I think we're happy to go straight to any questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Questions, anyone? Councillor Ruiz, then Councillor Ali, then Councillor Easter.
Thank you very much. And quite clearly, a huge amount of work has gone in since we last about this contract. I'm assuming that it has been co-produced by survivors and or others. I mean, I'm just assuming that. And just really, I mean, it does affect a lot of cases that come into children's services. So I'm also assuming that there's been some work in the departments. Yeah.
So, I mean, the strategy which underpins this is absolutely being co-produced, and not only that, but through the procurement process that this is asking for permission, survivors will be involved in that procurement process. And absolutely, the works closely with children. I don't know, Shah, do you want to add anything specific?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, just to echo what Jason said, we've been doing continuous and extensive co-production across the borough for the last 2 years or so. And for this piece of work as well as working with adult survivors, we've also been engaging with young people to develop our kind of model and to gain their responses. We'll also have survivors and residents as part of the panel as well, and they've helped support us write some of the questions as well.
Great, thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, a very well-written report. Thank you very much. Clearly, this is an important area that is the numbers are rising, as we know, due to various factors. I assume we are talking about assumptions here again, that we are looking for extension of the existing contract with Hestia for 7 months because we are reviewing classification and procurement, make sure that in the long term we are going to get this right. Is that right?
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Continue with a moment on that one. Sorry.
No, carry on, please.
Yeah, can I just add that given the sensitivity of this contract, the need for a high quality service to meet the needs of survivors and the fixed budget ceiling, it is proposed that the tenders are evaluated using an 80% quality and 20% price split. So going back to Sarah's question about involving the survivors, it's based on the experience and the research that, you know, what is it that survivors of domestic abuse really need as a service?
Okay, thank you. I think that's going to be reassuring to people that the emphasis is overwhelmingly on the quality of the service and making sure the right provisions are in place as being the number one priority. Councillor Easter.
Thank you. Given our aim to do things as a one council, and recognising that domestic abuse so often means work with a number of different departments, so housing, children, health, all sorts of different things. Can you confirm how this is going to fit in with the one council approach?
Yeah.
Yeah. The one council approach pretty much said it all. We'll be working very closely with our children's services, where our main referral comes in. Housing is particularly an interesting area that we must work together, because this is, a vital area where, we need to be ensuring that our survivors are safe and provided with adequate housing, and particularly where we've got children involved. Again, youth offending service, our faith organisations and women's organisation who are making referrals to us. So it is going to be a one council approach, as you say, and we've got to work together to ensure that we provide the quality of service, a diverse service that meets the need of survivors of DV.
Fiona wants to add a few more words.
Fiona, yeah.
Sure, Fiona.
So I think I just wanted to add, Chair and members, that this is a key part of the domestic abuse strategy that Councillor Wilson referred to. That's a shared domestic abuse strategy across the entire council. So there are actions within it for adults and health, for housing, for children's, for the community safety partnership, and for other parts of the council. There is a long-standing group that meets to ensure that we are meeting the needs of the action plan, and this forms part of it. And the colleagues have been involved in the development of the specification for this. And indeed, the specification for the service will require that the service provider, for example, works in family hubs, and as it currently does in the MASH and various other places as well. So there's also a one council approach in terms of delivery as well as in planning.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Councillor Lee Parkway.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just reading through the document, and I would like to commend the service area. Actually, there's quite a lot of really detailed information in this document, but actually the information that's actually quite shocking. And so I read in this section 4 talking about the amount of referrals. So it does say here 490 MAREC referrals in the period of 21 to 22, with a comparison of 1,000, maybe I'm talking nonsense, 410, MAREC referrals in the first quarter of the year, which actually shows there's been an increase of referrals through that service. Then it also talks around 1,205 MASH referrals within that same period of 21 to 22, with the comparison in the first quarter of being 1,040 MASH referrals. And then it goes on to say certain other things in regards to adult social care and so on and so forth, which shows me that there actually is a high need in this borough in regards to the services we're trying to procure, of which Councillor Khan talked about a quality service, not a quantity service, which is really important. I just want to ask maybe Councillor Wilson, if you would be minded to answer. In section 5, you spoke about what the service would look like. But I did note, and maybe I've read this wrong, so maybe just a little bit of clarification. I did read, now I can't find it, sorry. The service was targeted at around 900 survivors a year. Was that the right number I saw? Let's check. Yeah, support 900 individual survivors per annum in Newham. But just given the numbers that I've just read out, It would seem to me that there may be more that's needed in this service. And is there any opportunity to maybe extend what it is that we're doing? Because I'm assuming that we can only deliver amount of services with the pocket that we have. But is there any more? Do you envision that we would need more than that 900, given the numbers in which we see so far within the first quarter?
Yeah, and two quick caveats before I hand over to the officer team. One is obviously that we are always in this whole area dealing with an iceberg sort of scenario where we are only seeing those particularly predominant women, but there are other genders here who actually report domestic abuse. So there's a whole series of resource issues around this. But I did say in my introductory remarks that we're hoping to get, i.e. grant, was the reference I made in the introduction, to make certain that there are other resources available.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be relying necessarily on our public health grant. I would argue that there should be from other agencies as well increased resources in the whole area. And finally, this OHID, I'm emphasising this, the Office for Health and Improvement of Disparities. If we can continually argue as a campaigning council, which we are, that we need more resources in this is, hopefully on an upward trajectory to reflect the very real demand pressures. But I don't know whether Jason and Fiona want on the demand pressures. You raise a valid issue.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Thackway. I think that's absolutely 100% correct, kind of what you said. I think if members are looking at the document, you'll see that what we have done is we have proposed a core element, which is the service kind of as it actually is at the moment with the funding levels that we've got from the various sources. And then we have added in around half that amount, again, around 250 to 300,000 pounds across various other work packages that we can introduce should more money become available. We're aware that there is still government money that has been trailed, that has not yet come out as a result of the Domestic Abuse Act, which we could go for. Often nowadays, that money is coming out with an expectation of almost immediate spend. So having these work packages in here right now means that we can very quickly mobilise that money. Part of it is around increasing the capacity of the service provider, but part of it is actually also around training and support for our kind of generic members of staff. And I say the word generic probably incorrectly. I think there's definitely something about equipping local authority staff to be able to respond to reports of domestic abuse in an effective way. Many are, but I think there's more to do in terms of training them to help them do that, and then have this service as almost kind of managing the very specialised support elements.
Thank you. Do I have a supplementary? Can I, Councillor Wilson and the team, I guess maybe what I want to try and advocate for at this moment is today we've spoken about lots of money in this space, money that's well needed and deserved services. How actually there is something here. In my previous role as the Cabinet Member for Crime and Community Safety, one of our KPIs is to reduce the amount of domestic violence. And as much as that may sound great, it's actually a double-edged sword in regards to you want people to actually report domestic violence issues in order to be able to deal with the perpetrators and so on and so forth and give the support that's needed. So maybe I would, in a moment, just to say that there is something around what we're reading in this document that we shouldn't take for granted. This is a situation that is an epidemic in this country when it comes to domestic violence. And we talk quite passionately as a administration in regards to our importance around women, safety for women, violence against women, and all the other cohorts. And I would actually maybe advocate and push the point around, do we need more here? And is it something we should be campaigning for wider as a council? Because in actual fact, the families that are subjected to this type of crime, it has a larger impact on them. Exactly. Not just them, the survivor, but the children of which this act talks about and has put a lot of premise as now. So I would just push for you know, as much as we spoke about a lot of money today, actually, I think there should be some extra money in this space, Councillor Ali, because actually it's well deserved.
Yeah, I'm going to say, and then I'll
apart from this contract, obviously there are other services as well, and we've got some other work that we're doing, and you know, I don't know if Fiona would go into some details, but it might not be the platform for that at the moment, but the perpetrators program, and we're hoping that we will receive a bit more funding and a bit more resource in that area, because really what we also should be concentrating is to be able to work and engage with perpetrators.
Yeah, definitely.
The campaign, and I think that this is the finals, because I think, you know, you're hitting it, you know, at an open door, and I hope we all are as a campaigning council. Just to allude to the figures that you've referred to, I mean, in London, the Metropolitan Police recorded 97,490 domestic abuse offences in the year ending 2022. The projection is upwards, particularly the effects of COVID and living with COVID. And the length of abuse experienced by domestic abuse survivors, the length of abuse range from less than a month to 66 years. And that's just 1 year older than I am. You imagine, and I know people have been through that prolonged abuse, and the average was 6 years. And we as a society, really, we've got the legislation. Now we need the resources to match that, and we do need the outreach. We do also, as I think Fiona and Shah and the team, all of us would agree, to continue arguing that we need to train ourselves as a council and as workers to identify.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to recommendations then, if everyone is satisfied. Okay, so the recommendations are in section 3. That is to agree the reprocurement of the domestic abuse accommodation service for a contract with a period of 5 years at a maximum total cost of 5,215,000, with the new service commencing on the 1st of January 2024. The reprocurement is to include an option to extend by a further 2 years. That's 1+1, which would bring the total contract to 7,301,000. Also agree to further extend the domestic abuse community services contract with Hestia for an additional 7 months to ensure service continuity until the 31st of December 2023. The total cost of £317,916. Everybody content and happy to agree?
Agreed.
And I don't think we need to look at item 12.
Now, can you just exclude the press and public and just receive item 12 just for the minutes?
I have to exclude the press and public and then proceed with, do I? Okay. In that case, we do need to do it at 11. So members are asked to resolve the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business to the extent the exempt information is described in part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972 is likely to be disclosed. Can I get everyone to agree to exclude the press and public, please?
Yes.
Agreed.
George, you can disconnect us and we will allow Peter time to wend his way out of the room.
See you, Peter.
Nothing personal.